Hello, everybody. Welcome once again to another installment of A Rebel Without Applause, coming to you from my little television studio apartment here in the Wood of the Holly. And today I have a really good friend and an incredibly special guest, one of the funniest people I've ever met, one of the funniest comedians that's ever graced the stand-up stage. But not only is he a comedian, he is an author who has recently finished a really incredible book, which I just had the privilege to read. It's called Why Not? Lessons on Comedy, Courage, and Chutzpah. I've spent the last, 4 or 5 days in my total Mark Schiff cave, and now I get to be with him. So welcome, Mark Schiff. Thank you for the book.
Thank you, Bill. Great to see you, too. We used to hang out a long time ago at the clubs and all that stuff, so it's been a while. That photo on there is my bar mitzvah picture.
Clearly.
And I'm not the one in the pink. I'm not the one in the pink dress. That's my mother. I'm in the middle.
Okay, I got confused. So thanks for the
A lot of people get confused. Yeah, I'm in the middle. I'm the short one, the short person in the middle of the bar mitzvah.
Well, this picture tells you so much. It tells you about time, place. It screams middle class bar mitzvah.
Yeah.
This is like could be in a time capsule to kind of tell people, the social moment out of which, well, frankly, we both emerged. So,
the last time I did the limbo was at my bar mitzvah.
Okay.
Remember the limbo?
Yeah, when you go into the thing?
Yeah, you bent backwards.
Yeah.
It's something that people our age are not, we don't do that much anymore, the limbo.
Yeah, except in yoga, there's some variations on stuff.
And by the way, one thing we have in common, I noticed, the older you get, the bigger the glasses get on your head. You have tremendous frames, and so do I. They just scream older than 60 frames.
Yes. And who was that guy, the great studio executive? I can't, at
He had the Academy Award parties all the time. Yeah, he had those giant square frames.
Yeah, as he got older, I don't know if the glasses got bigger or his face got smaller.
Now they have actually, like wall TVs, now they have these frames that are like 70 inches, like panoramic.
Yes. Now, reading this book,
and we both have hats, by the way. We both have hats.
Yeah, well, God works, because for me, it's
Oh, no. I have a full head of hair.
Oh, yeah, you're still happening. That's great. Yeah, But this is something I've lived with for decades. This stuff made it sex. Oh, I don't know.
Were you born bald?
I was born bald. Then hair grew in, and then sometime in my late 20s, 30s, it made a gracious exit from my head. But I look at it positively because, frankly, my hair budget is zero.
So now with the whole woke thing, you can't make fun of bald people. Like, did you get cue ball when you were any of that stuff?
No, I got because I had the widow's peak. I wasn't quite a cue ball. It was just I got other stuff with the pubic hair on the top of the forehead.
Right. Sure, of course.
So I was a little bit of a variation. But reading the book, which I really loved, there was one image that just struck me so hard. And it was like if I was going to make a movie called Citizen Schiff, and they go, okay, well, what's the rosebud moment? And for me, as I read the book, it was the image you described so beautifully of sticking your head out the window of your father's truck as you navigated down the narrow streets of Manhattan, barking out directions to your dad as he was driving this truck. And all I could see was this huge friggin' smile on Mark Schiff's face. It just made me, I'm going to use the Yiddish word, kvel, the whole thing.
Well, those are some of the golden moments of my life, was working with my dad. He was a truck driver in Manhattan, and he also drove in New Jersey. And sometimes in the summer, I would go with him for a few weeks on the truck, sitting up really high, above all the cars. And I would help him maneuver these tiny little, 37th Street in Manhattan.
Oh, God.
And there's people double parked and triple parked, and he's got this giant trailer truck. It was quite extraordinary spending that time. We would go to, he'd get up early. We'd go to a place called the Munson Diner, actually. 4:30 in the morning. We'd have breakfast together, and then we go to work. It was an amazing time, and I loved that time. I got kids, and spending separate time with where not everybody's together is very important. So going out with my dad was a big thing with me. Yeah, it was nice.
And you were an only child, so you got
Only child.
all the
I got all the
attention
attention,
and the
which ruins you a little as you get older. You have to learn to unselfish yourself because only children get everything that second. So we're not used to waiting. I go, Ma, I'm hungry. And she'd just bring out the food. It's not like, and everywhere they went, they took me with them. You actually grow up in a way faster because you're always around adults. As soon as I would get home from school, I'd just be with them until the next morning. No other kids. Like when you have your brothers and sisters in the house, you can have a little action there, but they would go to sleep early and then I'd be up on my own.
One of the favorite lines was that you said you grew up in a one-bedroom apartment that doubled as a mini insane asylum.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. A one-bedroom insane asylum.
Yeah, I didn't know they made them. That was cool.
Yeah, it was extra.
Okay, so did they get federal funding or was it a state program?
There was none back then. No, it was none back then. You had to get it from your relatives or steal it. There was no checks.
No checks. So, I'm reading the book and I'm imagining you in your apartment in Queens. I grew up here in Los Angeles, very different, although I was born in New Rochelle and we migrated. And I thank my dad and my mom to this day for making that exodus from Westchester. All my relatives are now conveniently parked in Valhalla, underground. But
is that in California, Valhalla?
No, it's Westchester. It's where all the cemeteries
Westchester.
are.
Okay, my family is all in New Jersey at Bethel Cemetery.
Okay. So then you know where to find them then. Mine is, I don't know the name of the cemetery, but they're pretty much all parked in the same lot up in Valhalla, which is the northern boundary of Westchester.
Sounds like a Jerry Lewis word. Valhalla!
Exactly, yeah. And, one of the things that I was just reading as I was imagining your life is that you sounded like a very silent kid. Like a lot was just bottled up. And then it came exploding out, as this comedian. And I'm just curious how and when you thought you could even be a comedian. I never met a comedian. Like, how do you become a comedian? Like, I didn't know.
Yeah, great question. So for me, I had an epiphany. I was 12 years old. There's a story, and I think about Rodney where I talk about it, Rodney Dangerfield. My parents took me to a place called the Boulevard Nightclub on Queens Boulevard in Rego Park, Queens. And there was an Italian singer that opened it, Jimmy Roselli, I think his name. He had one hit called I Want Some Red Roses for a Blue Lady. Anyway, Rodney Dangerfield opened that show.
Oh, my God.
And he was the opening act. And I'm sitting there. I'm 12 years old, never seen a comedian before. This guy comes out with a red tie, with this black suit, this little skinny tie, and he demolishes the audience. And I looked and I said, and I looked at my parents laughing so hard, like I'd never seen them laugh their entire life. And I said, that's it. I know what I want to do. I want to be a comedian. I didn't even know what it was, but I said, I want to do what this guy's doing. This is what I want to do for a living. And I told my parents, and when you're 12, every day, most 12-year-olds change what they want. I want to be a fireman. I want to be a policeman. I want to be I want to work in a circus. I never forgot it. And behind me, you can see 600 comedy albums. I started listening to comedy right after that, going to the library, listening to comedy albums. I started going to comedy clubs to watch comedians at around 16 and 17. And then when I was 18, I went to the Improvisation in New York, 44th and 9th, and I saw a comedian named Ed Bluestone.
Yeah.
Ed was an incredibly funniest one-line guy I had ever seen at that point, except for Rodney, of course. And I said, how do you become a comedian? And he goes, okay, this is what you got to do. You got to write original material, original jokes, memorize them, and go tell them to people you don't know. And that's it. That's what we do, right?
Right.
Your mother, your father, your sister, your brother, you can tell them, they're going to lie to you. They're not going to tell you. You got to get up. And that's still to this day the only way to do stand-up comedy. Write some stuff, memorize it, and go find people that are listening to you.
That don't know you.
That do not, and tape it. The tape recorder, now it's the iPhone, is the only thing that does not lie. Your family will lie to you, your girlfriend, your wife, your kids. You put that tape recorder on after your show, and it tells you the truth, how well you did.
It's like the accountant at the end of the year, or, taxes. It's that.
It's dark.
It's dark. It's no fun to record yourself as you're bombing. It's not a fun
in
thing.
the beginning. Everybody bombs,
Right.
except for George Wallace.
He never bombed.
I had this conversation with George just recently, and I said, George, I remember seeing you when you were new. You just started now. You always getting these laughs. You go, oh, I was great right from the beginning. Right from the beginning, I'm getting all these laughs. It's a crazy world. He just knew who he was, and he was able to do it. But the old young white guys, Jewish guys, took us a long time. Jerry Seinfeld, it took a long time. Paul Reiser took time. Larry Miller, everybody took us a while.
Quick question. When you saw Rodney, was he Rodney or was he Jack Roy?
Rodney.
So that was before he really exploded out.
He'd come back. He had taken off to sell aluminum siding. And the story is people don't know this. Sometimes comedians, their wives, or if it's Joan Rivers or Phyllis Diller, their husbands or wives die or they get divorced, and they still talk about them like they're alive and still with them.
Mm-hmm.
Phyllis Diller talked about Fang, her husband Fang. She had been divorced from this guy for 20 years. Rodney talked about his wife. She had been dead for years, died of cancer. I'll tell you, my wife, he was back to Rodney Dangerfield. And the story is that he got that name. You know that story? George Schultz, who owned Pips in Sheepshead Bay.
Right.
Gave him that name.
I have a Pips story because you were talking about bombing, and my stand-up thing, I didn't really entertain the notion of being a comedian, but show business. And my grandfather was a movie executive at Warner Brothers, and it was all, my dad was taking directing classes with Lee Strasberg in LA, and I was like all swirling around me. But by the time I did the play with Milton Berle, I thought, I want to do stand-up. And I remember there's these, because I was new to New York, so it was like, there's people my age doing stand-up. There's this guy named Belzer who's like kind of the king of this little castle up there, uptown. And
Catch a Rising Star, yeah.
Yeah, and it was like, I went up there, and I remember I got to see this, and I saw people my age doing stand-up, because generally, like, comedians were like the Burls and the Benny. There was like an older generation out of vaudeville, or Jerry Lewis and Don Rickles, but I wasn't seeing people like my age, even Brenner, and those guys are a little
older, yeah.
Richard Lewis, they're older. And I see this guy, and he's got a funny chin. He's like a Michelin Man joke. I later learned he's a friend now with Steve Middleman.
Right.
And he had a funny look, and he was doing it. I'm going, this guy's like my age. He's doing comedy. Then it's like 6 months just to get the courage to do it, or even longer. So I'm just kicking around, bombing, trying to get on. I don't know anybody. And then finally, I heard there's a night at Pips, this place in Brooklyn, out in Sheepshead Bay. And I like the subway, and I get all the way out there, and I get on, and it's like the first set where it's like the jokes got laughs when they were supposed to. It was like, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 minutes. I don't know how long, but I got off, and I was like, fuck, I'm a comedian. I'm screwed for the rest of my life.
Right.
But it was at Pips. It was Pips. Yeah.
I'll tell you how far back I go to Pips. I worked there with Andrew Dice Clay when he only worked clean.
Oh, my God.
He didn't even curse at all. He just did Stallone and, a couple of impressions. But Pips was, we used to take the subway out there, 2 hours to get out there. You went through, and then the last show, you'd be done around 1 a.m. You got to get back on the subway for 2 hours. It was quite extraordinary, but it was another place to work out.
There were good audiences, as I recall.
Yeah. The stage, I don't know if you remember this, but the stage was the worst in all comedy clubs. You were high up in the air. It was like looking into a pit.
Yeah.
The audience, they were all the way down. You were up like 3 feet above them. It was very strange. It wasn't the usual like 1.5 feet or so. You were 5 feet high.
Wasn't that where Brenner kind of got his start?
Brenner was, George Schultz was very close to David Brenner. Yes.
And now I have another memory that I've shared with you before, but I'll share it with folks, is that there was a little sort of stop on the humiliation trail of the comedy apprenticeship, and it was called the Old Triple Inn. And you had clearly preceded me, because I remember seeing your picture up there, your 8x10 with a funny face on the wall. And
right, sure.
And I go, oh, that guy, and then of course, years later you put it together, and that was another like the Cheyenne have their Trail of Tears. Well, the stand-up comedians in New York have had a similar, less catastrophic journey. And Ye Old Triple Inn.
Ye Old Triple Inn was on 54th Street, and it was right across the street from Studio 54.
Oh,
literally diagonal to Studio 54. They had the little rope out in Studio 54. And I would go to Triple Inn a lot. And I would see all these people lined up trying to get into Studio 54. And I never wanted to be part of that generation. Like, to be rejected for my face or because my shirt wasn't tight enough and they didn't let you in. And so I would go into the Triple Inn and we talked about bombing. One night I got off the stage at the Triple Inn. I think the guy's name was Kenny. He said to me, Mark, I want to talk to you. He goes, your material is shit and you have no personality. I said, that's pretty clear. That's And when you want to become a comedian, nothing stops you. So I went back the next night to get on stage again, and the next night after that. So there's a lot of deterrents that come your way when you're starting out as a comic, and you have to like F them. I don't care what you say. I know there's something in me that can do this. Here's the thing with artists. The courage precedes the talent because the artist knows that they have the talent, but nobody can see it yet. So you need courage in order to try to pull this out of you before you even know if you really, really have it. Right. That comes first. A lot of people think, oh, you just sit down and start playing piano, or you do. No. You gotta have this crazy belief. One night I was at Triple Inn with Gilbert Gottfried, and Gilbert used to do a routine about people that died in his arms. I can't do it, but he would say, I was with John Kennedy and I'm holding him, and he would this one. So Sal Mineo, who was a very famous actor in the 50s and 60s, was stabbed to death.
Right. In West Hollywood.
Yeah, that's right. I think in his parking lot or something like that.
Is it Fountain?
Yeah, right up there. Right.
Yeah.
So Gilbert goes into this routine about how Sal Mineo died in his arms. And very funny, people laughing. And all of a sudden, somebody stands up, a woman stands up and starts screaming, I'm going to kill you. And it was Sal Mineo's sister. Happened to be in the audience. What a fluke this is. And he had just been murdered a couple of weeks earlier, or a couple of years earlier, and she was just getting out again. Yeah, whatever it was. But anyway, they had to restrain her and get Gilbert the hell out of there through the back because she wanted to slit his throat.
Oh my God! So it would have been
another murder.
Another murder. So you talk about courage, and then there's courage and chutzpah in your book, Comedy, Courage, and Chutzpah. And I was just curious: is there a difference between courage and chutzpah? Can we parse the difference?
I think it's pretty close. I think it's in my book, by the way, there used to be a thing, you don't have to be Jewish to enjoy Levy's rye bread. That was a commercial when I was growing up. Right. You don't have to be Jewish to enjoy my book. I put in, there's a lot of Yiddish words, and I have footnotes. Right. And the footnotes are generally attached to jokes too. I'd say 95% of the footnotes have the real explanation of the word, and then I add a joke to it.
Yes, I enjoyed that. Yeah. And that sort of is a big question or a big thing in your life because, you have like this secular comedy journey that you've taken, but also a religious journey that you've taken. I grew up just in a really secular kind of thing, and I hated going to temple. I was bar mitzvahed.
Right.
I identify still in my soul as being Jewish. I am proud of it. My mother is born in Berlin, a refugee. One of my core jokes is when my grandparents came to this country, they converted from Judaism to capitalism, and they've remained incredibly devout, ever since.
Right.
So how did this happen for you?
The journey, Judaism?
Yeah. Like, how did it find you, or you find it? Or
so I was born a believer in God. I just always believed. Even my parents were also secular. They were Reformed Jews. In fact, they were so Reformed, their temple was closed on Jewish holidays. Yes. So that's one of the great old
What was the Woody Allen joke? Is there's Orthodox, the conservative, and Nazi, and I'm like, that was
right. Sure. Nazi. So my parents would not, although they grew up kosher homes, which many people did back then. They sent me to, for the first 3 years, they sent me to an Orthodox yeshiva, even though they weren't. The reason they sent me there was because it was like daycare.
Mm-hmm.
These Orthodox yeshivas keep you till like 6 at night. My parents work full time. So if I went to public school, I'd be out at like 2:00,
Right.
3:00. And they didn't want me. This wasn't a, Dickens story here where, some urchin is running around the street in rags. So they had me at the school and I fell in love with rabbis.
Really?
I just loved them. I have no idea why. And then I went my way, public school. And then I started reading Jewish books. I just had this feeling. And Richard Belzer's brother, Len Belzer was his name.
Mm-hmm.
He was a friend of mine. And we started studying and reading these Jewish books together. No rabbis, nothing involved. And we just started talking about it. And it whet my appetite. And when I moved to California, one day I went to a Torah class and I fell in love with this rabbi. His name was Nachum Braverman. When I'm not on the road, I go to shul all the time, Friday and Saturday, not every day. And I put on the tefillin, which only takes a couple of days, it's the phylacteries.
Right.
And, but I love being Jewish like you. And, there's a line I read the other day, the difference between, not psychology, what is it? Philosophy and religion.
Mm-hmm.
Religion does something about it. Philosophy is there's some great philosophers, but nothing is really accomplished. You read it and you go, I mean, but in religion, if it's done well, and there's a lot of problems with all religions, including my own. Like, for instance, my wife and I are going to this thing, have this organization here to get 100 people in, and we make meals for 300 people. And we're going to feed these people that need it. And philosophers, they don't accomplish those things.
There's no obligation on philosophers to action.
That's exactly, and that's the problem with New Wave religion. It's nice, but it's very, they don't tell you, you don't do things. You just climb into yourself and try to relax and,
Right.
and make it a better world. How? What do you want me to do?
Interestingly, you mentioned that because I've done a lot of studying about Gandhi, who was in many ways the greatest Christian that ever lived.
Gandhi?
What's that?
Do you say Gandhi?
Yes, I've read a lot about Gandhi.
Sure.
In terms of, but Gandhi's religious philosophy compelled people to seek justice,
Mm-hmm.
and that was sort of in the sutras or his yogic belief. And then you have the Yogananda, who's got the self-realization places here.
Sure.
And it's very attractive to a lot of white middle class, upper middle class, even wealthy people, because it offers a sort of spiritual guide, but without any real obligation to action,
right,
or to seek justice or fairness or remedial kind of mitzvah-like behavior.
Mm-hmm.
So when you just talked about that, it made me think those currents are in basically probably all religions. I'll just tell you this. The last podcast I did last week with this guy, Ernie Lapointe, who's the great grandson of Tatanka Iyotaki, but he's known to most people as Sitting Bull, Chief Sitting Bull, who was a Lakota religious leader. And as he was describing his belief system, which is like, I feel like you're my close cousin, but talking to a Lakota person from South Dakota, that felt was new. But what he's talking about is what's fundamental to Lakota religious and spiritual belief is humor, which struck me because every photograph of an American Indian, he's like upset. But he just starts telling jokes and he's laughing. He's got a smile wider than my screen. And then all these things about forgiveness, and I go, wait a minute, that sounds pretty familiar. This is human to me, not just restricted to
That's right.
one belief system. So I just wanted to share that because
yeah. There's a lot of good in all of them. What was that, Joe? You said Sitting Bull. What was it? This Indian kid marries out of his religion and his mother changed her name to Sitting Shiva.
Yes.
I think that was basically, that's the punchline.
I think, wasn't it Sitting Shiva who defeated Custer at Bighorn? I think. No, Sitting Bull defeats Custer at Bighorn. And then afterwards, they had the Sit Shiva.
Right.
They were Sitting Shiva for Custer. Okay.
Right, there you go.
There's something there. I don't know. maybe, I don't know.
Judaism is so steeped and rich in wisdom. That's the other thing that you don't get in a lot of other places is the depth and the wisdom. If you have a good rabbi and if you have a good teacher, you're going to learn a lot about life and how to conduct yourself.
Now, I was reading in your book, too, there was a rabbi that was shared my last name, Kalmanson. I think he's pretty well known. He's a writer of some sort.
Yeah. Was it Kalmanson, just like your name? Or
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh.
And actually, my own family, a little bit beyond my grandfather, there's the Lithuania, the rabbis, the Kolonists.
Of course, we all come from that stock. You know, Belzer, there's the Belzer Rebbe.
Oh, so his brother was a rabbi.
But the dynasty is very. So what was the story about the Kalmanson, the rabbi? Do you remember it all?
It's in your book, and you just referred to him, and of course it jumped out at me because it's my own name.
Sure.
Let me see if I can find it here.
Rabbi Kalmanson. That's you.
Yeah. So
not too late. You can become a rabbi.
Yeah, it could be a rabbi. Here it is. This gift was the book Positivity Bias by Mendel Kalmanson.
Kalmanson. Okay, he's a Chabad rabbi.
So the quote was, viewing other people through the lens of a good eye endows us with a certain degree of optimism.
What it is the Rabbi Kalmanson took the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe's writings and turned them into stories. I'll give you an example of how good these guys are, these rabbis. I was at this Shabbos dinner run by this Chabad rabbi, and I said to him, I'm sorry I wasn't at synagogue this morning because I just came for lunch. I said, I'm sorry, but the devil got me. I just couldn't get out of bed. And he looks at me and goes, no, you know what happened? You wrestled with the devil and eventually you won, and here you are at lunch. So he turned it into a positive story rather than I was just beaten into eventually I beat the guy. And here I am. I still showed up, even though I was 3 hours late. So that's what those guys do. They, turn, they're good.
So
there's a lot of Jewish stuff in the book because it's very meaningful. I didn't know how Jewish I was until I actually wrote the book.
Well, I was curious because, you talk about how you were welcomed into the Torah Club. And I just thought to myself, the Torah Club, who books it? Can you put in a word for me? How do I get in? Is there an audition?
They love funny people and these rabbis because most people have these, like you said, these jobs. They're accountants and lawyers and doctors and homemakers and all these wonderful things. But they never see a comedian in these classes. I got the biggest laugh, by the way. I'm gonna tell you, it's hard. I'll explain it to you. And so one time, the mayor of Los Angeles is at a synagogue event, and he's taking questions. And they're asking him these very deep questions about nuclear bombs. Are you prepared that if they drop the bomb in Los Angeles, what's going to happen? And if poison gas is dropped, do we have places? And it's very, very depressing. And they said, any more questions? So I raised my hand. And I said, hey, I have a question. Can you park at a broken meter without getting a ticket? And the place erupts because I went from nuclear holocaust to, I said, I'm confused. If I park at this meter and I try to put money in, it doesn't take it. And he looks at me, he goes, I don't know. The mayor, and he asked his assistant there, and the assistant goes, I don't know. I have to get back to you on that. Meanwhile, he's answering questions about nuclear bombs. He can't answer about a broken meter. The place erupted. It was just so. That's what makes a comedian. We pick these little moments when we can, we find a nugget, and then it explodes if you do it. That was one of those moments.
Seinfeld is, of course, a master. That's his whole thing, is the most innocuous little moments in our life. He's made them into little gems. I mean, one of
the great privileges of my life is to be friends with Jerry. We go way back to the beginning, and we're on the road. I'm still on the road with him. We've been on the road for 20 years together, and I'll sit and watch him do a set, and he's always great. And then after, I'll say, listen, maybe you can fix this, and I'll work material with Jerry. You know how many comedians would die to be able to do that, to spend an hour with Jerry Seinfeld working on his act with him, or him working on your act?
My biggest memory with Jerry is some years ago. God, I can't even tell you. My agent called and said, well, there's a new series. There's a pilot they want you to read. Okay. And so I go into a room, and Larry David's sitting on a block, and Jerry's got the script. And there's the two friends, and you read for one of the friends, and I did it. And I go, well, can I read for the other guy? That he was a Kramer, and the other one, I forget, I'm blanking now. And
Right.
sure, they were all friendly, and I was familiar, but they didn't really know me. And then I read it, and I walked out of there thinking to myself, "That's going nowhere."
Right.
This
That's
show,
99.9%
no
interesting. Yeah.
chance. Like the
Right, of
triple N guy
course.
to you, nowhere. They didn't pick me, obviously, but the history is history. That's my.
You probably would have been good, but it was a miracle the group that they ended up with.
It was,
It
and
was
Brandon Tartikoff stuck with them. Nowadays it'd be flushed down the toilet after 4 episodes, maybe not, but they don't really give people chances to breathe inside of shows anymore. In my view,
it did not do well in the beginning of the first year. In fact, people didn't like the characters because they were so offish and not nice. None of those characters were really nice. Jerry brought me into Brandon Tartikoff, and I sold an idea for a pilot, and it didn't really go, but it was nice of him. He's every once in a while when I ask him, he steps up, and like my book, he wrote the foreword
right.
to my book, and it's a beautiful foreword. It's a beautiful thing, and I'm indebted to him. And then he tweeted about it, so it's all nice.
Now, you had some beautiful interactions in your book, and one of the things I want to add, I don't know if I said it in my introduction, but you're also a playwright. And
Yes.
you wrote a play. You had Larry Miller in it, I believe, and
Yep.
it's just a gorgeous story about Neil Simon coming to see your play. I just love that.
It was one of the highlights of my life, and there's been a lot of highlights. So Larry Miller was the star of the play, and Larry had done a play with had been in a Neil Simon play, not one of his bigger plays, but he'd done a Broadway thing with Neil Simon, and he knew Neil. So he says to me one day, "Hey, Mark, we're doing a play. You want me to give Neil a call and see if he wants to come down and see our play?" Because Larry would not have done that if he wasn't proud of the work.
Mm-hmm.
And he comes in the next day or so, and he goes, "I spoke to Neil. He's going to come down on Friday, see the play." I said, "Really? Neil Simon's coming?" Meanwhile, this was my first play. How many people write their first play and then Neil Simon? That's like having Shakespeare come down to your play. It's insane.
It's enough to get your first play even produced, let alone
it's unbelievable.
Shakespeare visit you.
So Neil comes, and then I'll cut to the chase after I'm standing next to him, and he says to me, "You cannot make this any funnier." Coming from Neil Simon, that he's saying that this thing is so friggin' funny. And then he says, "Listen, this is the problem with it. Your ending is ambiguous. We don't know if he lives or dies. You have to let the audience, one way or another, let them know. You can't do this to the audience." I thought about it, and then I went home, I rewrote the ending, and it started getting standing ovations. So I thought, here I am. I just co-wrote a play with Neil Simon. Of course, he didn't co-write it, but he gave me this ending, his brilliance. He saw it, and he changed the ending of the play, and he was right. And it became HBO optioned it to make a movie, and it became a whole thing of itself. And Larry Miller was incredible.
One thing about Neil Simon, he understands that everything you set up, you have to pay off.
I think Anton Chekhov said, if you're going to show a gun, you better use it.
Exactly.
Because you can't just leave it sit there. Interesting about what you said. As Neil Simon matured as a writer, he did not tie up the ends. In the beginning, his earlier movies, it had this very neat, clean ending to it. And he said to me, he said to me, I read about him. He said, life doesn't end necessarily so clean with a perfect ending all the time. Those were his early plays. Later on, there was things that weren't so tied up, because he says that's really what life is about.
I'm trying to think of like what would be a good example, from like Barefoot in the Park to Prisoner of Second Avenue, and of course The Odd Couple. But there's something comforting when guys get the girl, things resolve in a way, and it's
Right.
almost like a way of saying there's a God, he's looking after us, there's order in the world.
Yeah, but that
universe.
Isn't really the way life is, right?
No, it isn't. But sometimes the comfort of that allows us to just rest easy. I always think, well, people say, Bill, do you believe in God? I said, I believe in God. I'm not so hot on the Lord, but I'm into God. If I meet a beautiful woman and she sleeps with me, I thank God. Lord has nothing to do.
Thank God.
if I'm on an airplane and out of 4 engines going out, you're going to find out if you're an atheist real fast, because you're going to start praying to whoever's, may or may not be looking after you. So I think certain plays kind of affirm order. That's sort of what romantic comedies sort of do. They sort of tell you
and they
this.
like happy endings and stuff like that.
Right. And God has provided a mate for you. Like there's somebody out there for you. It's set up that way. It's a nice world.
There is a belief in Judaism that 40 days before you're born, your mate, God decides who you're to marry. Now you just got to go find this person. It's and a lot of marriages don't work out. By the way, about the planes, the engines, you know that joke about the 4 engines? Like these people are on the plane, and then the pilot makes an announcement, ladies and gentlemen, our right engine just conked out. So we're safe, everything's okay, and it's going to take a little longer to get to where we're going. Then about 5 minutes later, the pilot says, ladies and gentlemen, our left engine, one of the left engines just conked out. It's going to take a little longer to get to where we're going, but we're safe. Then he comes on again. He goes, ladies and gentlemen, the second engine on the right just conked out, and it's going to take even longer now, but we're safe. Then he comes on and he goes, ladies and gentlemen, our last engine just conked out. And this Jewish guy says to the guy next to him, oh, we're going to be up here all day.
Well, there's a lot of humor in the wisdom and the humor. One thing I learned from your book, and I had no clue about this, is that tefillin apparently clinically is good for AFib or helps resolve AFib. Is that true?
Wow, you really did. So I have atrial fibrillation, which is I don't have it all the time, but every once in a while my heart goes out of a sinus rhythm. Mm-hmm. In fact, I had a cardiologist that when it went back into rhythm and he checked my EKG, he came into the room going, I got rhythm. I got rhythm. You got rhythm. We're back in rhythm now. When you're a comedian, it brings out funny things and even cardiologists.
Right.
So I was in the hospital for a stomach thing, and then I noticed that my heart was beating irregular. So they checked it and they said yes, and they moved me up to the cardiac thing there because they were really worried. And my heart's beating at 150 beats a minute, which is really, really fast. And it was morning, and I had my tefillin. My wife had dropped off there, and I wrapped it on my arm, and I said, I'm going to say my prayers. And a few minutes later, I was out of AFib. So coincidence? Maybe, who knows?
Who knows?
But that worked, and thank God.
Yeah.
So that's the way it is.
I have a tefillin story, and I've never done it, but I visited my father in his office. It's right around the corner here. And every once in a while, there's like some Chabad rabbi, and he's there for...
They stop you. Sure.
Making the pitch for money. And I walk into my dad's office, and the rabbi's there with my dad's got the check, it's written, and he's got the tefillin and the thing, and my dad is, when I go to temple with my dad, we go for 10 minutes. He goes, all right, we're out of here. And we're out. Okay. So I see my dad, and then the rabbi says to me, would you like to? Okay. And then he starts warning me. He goes, be very careful. He goes, there is a lot of bad tefillin on the street right now.
Wow.
Without Torah scrolls and without whatever. Just be very careful. There's some bad tefillin on the street right now.
Wow. That's like bad dope.
Yeah, exactly.
We got some tefillin that's been cut with
yes, diluted. It's not right. It's got fentanyl in it. Please don't stay away.
So every once in a while, you may not need to know this, but every once in a while you do have to bring your tefillin in to have it checked. And they open up the box to make sure, because it's God's name in there, and to make sure it's still in good shape, it's not crumbling or whatever. You need to make sure it's still kosher.
You in other words, you bring it in after a certain amount of miles.
You bring it into a scribe who writes Torah and people who know what to look for, and then they open it and they check, just like mezuzahs on the door. It has a little scroll in there, and every once in a while you're supposed to every 10 years, whatever it is, check it to make sure it's still kosher.
I do have a mezuzah on my door, but I got it in like Budapest, but I wouldn't know how to open it without destroying it. I don't know.
Well, it wouldn't help you to open it because you don't know what to look for.
Okay, so I'm going to leave it be. It helps because my landlord is from Israel, and I get a discount as long as I keep.
He likes Jews in the building, yeah. I understand.
Yeah, it's good. Wow.
Mine too.
Mark, it's so much fun to talk to you, man. I don't know what it was like for you going to the Bud Friedman Memorial. It brings back a lot of memories for me, not all good, actually. I could think of, everyone was going up there saying, if it wasn't for Bud, I wouldn't have had a career. And if someone asked me to go up, I said, well, if it wasn't for Bud, I would have had a career, but I didn't get a chance.
Right.
To share that sentiment.
That's not the place, really. You got the kids there that are struggling, but I understand. Not everybody fared well with them.
Yeah, I appreciated it because I owe Bud. I got some time there, and it was important for me, and it was a nice thing to see him through a different lens. Of just like, hey, Bud, can you get me? What do I got to do? Hey, can I? So
yeah, I know.
He was a bigger mensch than I definitely had a chance to see, although I got glimpses of it, and my one Bud, well, I just was, things came back to me in the room, and I remember coming up to Bud. This is one of my really harsh, difficult moments trying to get on, and I said, Bud, what do I got to do to get on stage here? And he looked at me and he goes, kill about 40 comics. And I said, oh, well, it's
right.
A little bit out of my range.
People don't know how hard it is to how we vie for these spots at these clubs, even though the work is free and we really don't get paid. When I call in at the Laugh Factory, if I get a spot, there's 200 comedians that call in.
I know.
That want, and there's only, I had a Bud story. Bud was notoriously, and it's cheap. He just was known as being cheap. And one time, the improvisation had a cruise line. I did it with John Biner and a couple of people, cruise ships. So we're on the ship, and Bud says to us, we're landing in St. Thomas tomorrow. I want to take all you guys out for lunch. There's an Italian place. I like this place. So we go and have lunch. And this isn't like Bud to take you out and spend money. So he goes, listen, I'm going to pay for lunch, but I want you all to do me a favor. Do not tell anybody that I paid for this lunch, because I don't want word to get out that, I don't want other people to think I'm going to take them to lunch. We tell him, okay. And then we find out he actually didn't pay for lunch. He had a per diem that the ship gave him, and the ship actually paid for lunch. So he's telling us that he paid for lunch, but he never really did in the beginning. And it was quite hysterical. It was perfect. I'll tell you one more quick story about, Paul Provenza?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I just saw him at the, a couple of weeks ago. Yeah.
Yes. So I used to do many more of these, what do they call them? Tricks on people. Why am I forgetting the word?
Practical jokes, whatever.
Yeah, practical jokes. So sometimes you got to set them up years in advance. And I did one with Paul Provenza. I was on St. Thomas on the island, and I'm sitting at this little place having coffee. I was doing a cruise ship. And lo and behold, Paul Provenza is walking by. He was on a cruise ship, a different ship. And I go, hey, Paul. He looks, he goes, Mark, how you doing? What are you doing here? And I said, I live here. And he goes, you live here? I said, yeah, I live here. I've been here for about a year. And he goes, really? And I said, no, I'm on this cruise ship, So he sits down. Then I said, let's take a picture. And this is before the iPhone. So we take a picture. I always have a camera, and we take a picture. And then I had it printed, and I cut it down, and I put it in my wallet, a picture of me and Paul, thinking, because I hardly ever saw him. I said, one day I'm going to bump into him and tell him that I really love him, and I feel so close to him that I've been carrying this picture of you with me for years. So sure enough, like 5 years go by, and I bump into him. Hey, Paul, how you doing? He goes, hey, Mark, how you doing? Are you still doing the ships? I go, no. And I go, by the way, Paul, I've always considered you like one of my best friends in the world. He goes, really? I said, yeah. And I said, let me show you. And I open my wallet, and I take out a picture of us with our arms around each other. And he just almost collapses. He goes, you've been carrying this picture of me with you around for years? I go, yeah. And he just walked away scratching his head like he'd never seen anything so weird in his entire life. That was a good practical joke that took years to complete.
And you prepped it knowing at some point that it would give you a moment.
It would give me a few seconds where I could just blow his mind right out of the top of his head.
Well, that's hilarious.
I mean, be equally like, what can I tell you? So that's what we do, Bill.
We do. Yeah, you're one of my heroes in many ways. And it started when
Very
I first,
sweet.
When, we worked together in Indianapolis, and I watched you and I go, this guy's like the greatest when I was a kid comedian that I've ever seen. And you were. Now you when I was a father or grandfather, you've got a larger journey now that you've traversed. But
thank you.
Folks, read the book, Why Not? Lessons of Comedy, Courage, and Chutzpah. It is available on all the literary download portals, or you can Amazon it, or if you can find a bookstore, that's hard now. I'd say you can find it in a bookstore, but there are no bookstores. If you're fortunate enough to find it.
I went yesterday to Barnes & Noble in the Grove. I went there. They still have a Barnes & Noble. Okay. And I went and I signed copies of it.
Oh, good. So there's still real books in real bookstores. But you got to catch the book, and it's you don't have to be Jewish to enjoy it. It is a journey into, the soul of Mark Schiff, and it's a deep soul. It's a poetic soul too. There's a lot of it. You mentioned you were at some point you were in the Village and Bob Dylan, and you said you were going to be a poet, and I said, wow, that's like a piece of Schiff that I hadn't imagined or even thought about. And then the chapters, there's poetry in this, and it's really a good read. And I just want to congratulate you again. And
thank you. I'm so glad I bumped into you. Sorry we bumped into each other at a memorial. But look how kind Bud was. He put us back together.
As we get older, there's more and more memorials. So there's more and more opportunities to convene for us survivors. I'm reminded of like a game of musical chairs when I was in elementary school. So, they pull out a chair, we all come together. So
you got to make me a promise, though.
Tell me.
That the next time I see you, and I'm going to make you the same promise, that your glass frames are not any bigger than they are now, and I will not get bigger ones. This is it. This is as far as we're going with
this. Is
large.
Okay, because as our heads shrink, we might have to readjust to maintain the same proportions.
Yeah, so let's not any bigger than this. You're going to look like we're going to look like cartoon characters.
Magoos. We're going to look like Magoos. Yeah,
Mr. Magoo.
Yeah. Well, Mark, continued success and love, and it's just a beautiful story, and it's I really enjoyed it. So I wanted you to know that. And I'm going to end as I always do with my little namaste, shalom, and aloha. By that I mean namashaloha. Thanks to Mark Schiff. Check out the book. And folks, I'll see you on the other side.